So it's a very interesting and exciting panel that I have the privilege of hosting this Friday evening. And the topic that we've thought of talking about is with respect to coping with COVID. The COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown that it has brought about is something that has affected businesses almost all and sundry. Whether you're consumer facing, whether you're a B2B business, there was a nationwide lockdown that was implemented, followed as well by the country, and that is something that has really pushed the brakes on businesses, not just in India, worldwide. But nevertheless, there are some businesses that have managed to pivot with just a little bit of innovation to not just survive through this pandemic, but also thrive. And I'm going to be talking to all of these ladies who've managed to get into the drawing boards, rejig, their plans for the future in order to ensure that their business as well is able to, may not be able to sail through, of course, but at least survives through this pandemic. So I have the privilege of introducing these four wonderful ladies on the panel. First up, Vinita Bali, a global business leader with extensive experience in some of the largest and leading companies in India and abroad. She's got the wonderful experience of working with eminent multinationals like Coca-Cola, Cadbury, Schweppes, and of course, we all in India know her as, heading Britannia Industries up until 2014. Vinita, pleasure having you with us today on the show. Vinity Saraf Mutreja, MD and CEO of Vinity Organics. She's been on the management team of the leading chemical company since 2006. She balances technical and manufacturing execution with all of her marketing abilities, and of course, not to mention with all of the new age aggression required to handle a business today. And not just that, Vinity was also in fact chosen as the Outstanding Woman Business Leader for 2018 by the jury of the Economic Times Family Business Awards. So Vinity, thank you as well. It's a pleasure having you with us today on the show. Well, followed by Gauri Devi, they are the director of Food Matters India Private Limited. And for Mumbaikars, I guess you'll better recognize her as the face or the individual behind the very popular restaurant in South Mumbai, The Table. In fact, she's expanded it to even co-found Magazine Street Kitchen and also Miss Tea, a Southeast Asian fine dining restaurant and a cocktail lounge in Colaba. Interestingly, she's also, of course, working or is on a podcast called The Colaba Cartel, which is a show on what goes into the making of a restaurant in Mumbai. And Gauri, I'm particularly excited to, in fact, bring you as well on board because it's this one sector, the restaurant business especially, that's been hit very hard with the lockdown. So thank you as well for giving us your time. And finally, Shivaarti Bajaj, the co-founder of Box Engage and FTI Fund. Interestingly, she started off as an events aggregator, but it was called goparties.com, but she pivoted to Box Engage, and guess what? This is a video streaming platform that managed to gain tremendous traction, especially after the ban on TikTok. Shivaarti, thank you as well for joining in, and a very, very warm welcome to all of our wonderful ladies. Vinita, let me start off with you first. You will have a very different approach to the topic that we are discussing. You sit on the board of directors of several companies. These are companies that are eminent, that are established, that have a whole structure in place. And I'm sure, all of these companies will have a proper blueprint that they may have planned, a 5-year vision and a 7-year vision and what have you. However, once the lockdown hit, all of these vision plans, and I'm sure may have gone for a toss, and you'd all have to get back to the drawing board, back to the blueprints to figure out, okay, now, you know what, forget about thriving, but maybe survival itself could be, at stake right here for the company because of the COVID-19 lockdown. So what's the mood like today in these big companies, and when the board meets, what's the mood like? Is it now of calm because now that the worst of the lockdown is behind us, or are companies still alert for any sort of uncertainties that this pandemic may throw up and what shape it may take?
Thank you, Mobina, and thanks for including me in this program. It's been very interesting, and I talk about boards not just in India but also overseas. I sit on 3 other global boards overseas, and the reason I'm mentioning that is for the first time, by definition, this pandemic is actually global. And what I have really seen, you use the word calm. Boards and managements, I must say, have been incredibly calm, which is what you require to deal with an event which has been discontinuous, an event that has no precedent, an event that nobody knows when it is going to end or how it is going to end. And I think this is the time that sort of separates the wood from the trees or the men from the boys, whichever way we want to look at it, and to say we've got to get down to the core of the business. What this has also done is increased management resolve to look at the business in a way de novo, change the things that need to be changed. We've heard the word pivot mentioned a lot, but I do want to say upfront that you can only pivot once you've got a strong position in your core business, because you need that strength to be able to pivot. Otherwise, the pivot is going to not get you very far. So what I have seen is a very clear back to the basics. Let's look at what is essential, conserve cash, make sure there is enough liquidity in the business, make sure that customers are being dealt with appropriately, make sure that employees are safe, and so on. And that's pretty much been a very common thread. It's also called into question the economics of the business itself, and the things that should continue, the things that must change, new ways of doing things. I'm sure as we go along, we'll hear the word, digital, digitize, etc. And, we can talk about that later. But yes, by and large, good companies and good managements have been calm. They've looked at it dispassionately. They've looked at the situation with a firm resolve and keeping priorities very, very clearly in mind. And that is what, to my mind, will make the difference between those that come out of this even stronger and those that, just can't manage to go through with this.
Yeah, point taken. I mean, it's always easy to say that, okay, use a little innovation and just pivot to something else. But if your core business itself is not strong, that pivoting as well may not really lead you anywhere. Okay, Viniti, Suraf, let me come to you now. You sit at the helm of a huge chemicals company, and we've all been talking about the opportunity that this entire trade relation gone awry with China has brought about, for the chemical sector. Please do correct me if I'm wrong, but this is one development that has taken place, and I want to understand how Viniti Organics as well has sort of, in a way, maybe this was your silver lining in the clouds. But yeah, what were the challenges that you faced, when it came to the lockdown and the pandemic, and I'm sure employees as well were not easily available. Raw materials, in fact, to even make your product may not have been easily available. So walk us through how were those lockdown days for you?
Sure, Mubina. Thanks for having me. Now, first, let me just give you a brief background of what we do. Now, we make very niche specialty chemicals that cater to various industries, such as pharmaceutical, oil and gas, agro, personal care, etc. Now, each industry has been affected differently due to the pandemic. Overall, starting the COVID, starting January, the oil and gas sector has been low. But luckily for us, because we cater to such diverse applications, for example, our pharmaceutical sector is doing quite well. Our chemical that services pesticides industry, the agrochemical, is doing quite well. The one coming that goes into water treatment is also doing okay. Now, we have two plants, both based out of Maharashtra. When the lockdown was first announced, both our factories were shut. But most of our chemicals do count as or are considered as essential goods or essential commodities. And so we got permission to restart our plants fairly quickly within, say, 2 or 3 weeks. We did have labor issues initially, but again, fortunately, most of our labor is local, so we didn't have much of the migration issue. So as of today, both our plants are running at about 60-70% capacity. We have about 70% labor back in our factories. So we are doing relatively okay, can't complain. You can see our, we are a listed company. You can see our numbers. So that itself will tell you that we are doing fine. Now, coming to our corporate office, HO, which is based in Mumbai, again, a relatively old school business, manufacturing business, not very work from home savvy initially, but now suddenly everybody is. So that has been a silver lining, at least for the corporate office, for the HO here. Then talking about the broader issue that you mentioned, China, talking about the industry, we don't compete with China in our products, barring one. So we are, so the Chinese migration is not really affecting us in that sense. Also, we don't procure a lot of our raw materials from China. So we are doing fairly okay as far as raw material availability is concerned. Most of our raw materials are sourced locally from India. But the industry, yes, is going to benefit because China is moving out of the chemical industry. It is focusing more on AI, tech, and these data, these kind of industries. So chemicals in general for the next 10 years will do well in India. At least that's my view. Also, there's a US-China trade war that has been happening even before the pandemic. A lot of duties have been imposed on Chinese goods, and Indian companies have benefited. So, yeah, on the whole, quite positive.
Okay, so while the industry that Vinity Organics operates in, things seem to be looking up going forward. I wouldn't say the same for the industry that Gauri Devi Dayal's business does operate in, the restaurants business. Now, for Mumbaikars like me, the table is quite a popular haunt in Mumbai. But for me personally, I have survived this lockdown binging on the croissants that I buy from Mac Street Kitchen that's mercifully delivered home. But Gauri, I know that, I'm sure this path to, sort of delivering food to people's homes may not have been perhaps an easy one because, the restaurant business, your bread and butter business, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's firstly under lockdown. Secondly, it's purely discretionary. So perhaps even if the lockdown sort of eases, I would imagine that maybe consumers may not flock to restaurants because, we are in the midst of this cash crunch as well, right? Because of what the economy is doing. So how are you approaching business now? What are the strategies that you're trying to deploy to ensure that you stay afloat, stay alive until this entire this bad phase sort of passes us by?
She's on mute.
Sorry about that. So thank you for having me on today. As you rightly mentioned, the restaurant industry is one such which can't work from home. And but what we did very sort of early on, almost at the beginning of April, is kickstart our delivery business. So we actually, you mentioned some of our brands earlier while introducing me. We actually launched 2 brands just before lockdown. One is a Indian delivery kitchen called Iktara, and the other is a Cantonese restaurant called May 13. So they barely had about 2 or 3 weeks of business before we had to close down. But what we did do is that because this was our first sort of foray into a delivery format for Indian cuisine, we were actually in a position to start that very quickly when lockdown started and food delivery was permitted. So 2 of the things that we resumed were the bakery, like you mentioned, Mac Street Bread Co. And it was interesting because I think bakery is sort of like a grocery staple, and a lot of people at that time were kind of stocking up. It was almost like a war zone in a way. People were sort of stocking up on essentials and groceries, and the bakery actually kind of took off in a way that we didn't actually anticipate. And there were times when we had to actually shut down temporarily because we were a bit overwhelmed with the response. But one of the key things that allowed us to do this, because considering a lot of our labor had actually gone back to their hometowns, was so firstly working with those who were available and that they were actually the required sort of skills to be able to kickstart this. That was critical for us. But I think the crucial thing that allowed us to do this was that we had space where we were able to relocate our team, a very small team, but we were able to relocate them to the premises. And I think at the, sort of height of the lockdown, and when, this safety, of course it is today as well, but it was really of paramount concern to everyone when it came to food. Firstly, I was able to reassure people that we didn't have our team sort of moving in and out of the kitchen, exposing themselves potentially. And secondly, because we were so short-staffed, I was actually in the kitchen every day helping with, packing and deliveries, because it was literally all hands on deck. We went back into like startup mode almost.
Okay, so from one consumer-facing business to another, but with a little difference, because this one is technology-oriented. And if this lockdown has taught us anything, it's that we love spending time on our phones. And Shivaarti, you clearly seem to have, capitalized on that very well. But this, I mean, what a pivot. You started off, associated with the business of events. But how did you pivot to something that's technology related then?
Yeah, so Mubina, since we were in the space of, we were always an event aggregator, and although supply chain was majorly offline, we did have a semi-digital leg which was pretty strong in terms of discovery and ticketing and the AI engines in place. So as you know, the motivation behind all businesses and all pivots will always be the P&L, and nothing like a black swan event to make you realize that. So once you're facing the wall, all you can do is either just sit there or just turn back and fight. So we obviously chose the latter, and that's how Boxing Gate was born. Because since, as Vinita already mentioned, that you need to have a good spine to pivot. So luckily, our semi-digital leg was already so strong that it helped us to pivot to a completely digital platform in the manner of boxinggate.com, which is basically a video streaming platform and can be touted as a TikTok plus, wherein a user can stream videos in multiple formats of their choice, live, recorded, short, long, whatever suits them the best. So it's entertainment gone digital in a way.
Very interesting indeed. All right, well, in this show, it's all about getting the panelists as well to talk to each other about, the on-ground realities that they face, and I'm sure they would as well be able to sort of engage with one another in a more realistic manner. So I'm going to open the floor to the panelists as well to ask each other questions. Vinita, let's start off with you first. I'll let you take your pick. Who would you like to shoot your first question to?
So Shivaarti, what is the one thing that had to change very quickly? Because in one way, the advantage of digital is that you've got a very expansive audience. There are literally no boundaries. But on the other hand, there is a back end that is required to actually make that happen. So what were those one or two things that were the biggest challenge in the so-called, change in the way your business delivered entertainment to its customers?
So in terms of the challenge, as you say, the biggest challenge for us to move from a brand like Go Parties to Boxing Gate was our supply chain in the earlier model was completely offline, because it was a going out application for people to discover and book wherever they wish to go. We had to move the supply chain online. Moving the supply chain online meant not only getting your customers, which we already had in terms of one-way viewership, but to get content creators interested in the platform, to get them to find a value proposition, for brands to find a value proposition to be associated in terms of them getting the kind of target audience that they want for their brand visibility, which luckily for us worked in our favor because of our already existing AI engines. And the platform now has a very high recommendation value to its users, wherein they can get to see the kind of content they wish, and this in turn gives brands a very high value. So for us, the challenge was to make the whole supply chain go online.
So in your case, would it be a fair conclusion to say that actually, this challenged you to think differently about your core business And you've actually ended up extending and expanding the footprint of your core business.
Absolutely. Very well said. This is exactly what it is, because the Black Swan event made us realize that digitalization was always the way. We knew it 5 years back when we started.
Sure.
But this has been a catalyst of a kind wherein everyone was waiting for it to come, but no one really knew at what pace it will come or whether it will come in hiccups or in parts, but they just happened overnight. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. So,
Mobina, before I hand it back to you, it's like saying, COVID-19 is the name of the new digital transformation officer in every business.
Yes, well said.
What about for Vinity Organics? And I believe that's something that you were intrigued in knowing about, Shivaarti, from Vinity as well, right? That whether a business like Vinity Organics, to what extent can digitization happen over there? So Shivaarti, shoot your question to Vinity.
So Vinity, since you just mentioned yours is a B2B, majorly B2B stream. So I just want to understand how much the digitalization would work in your case, since it's majorly B2B leg to your whole business model.
Well, see, it is a manufacturing business where technology, in any case, if you look at our plants, they are continuous, digitally operated manufacturing operations. Now, when it comes to even the supply chain, there's only so much it can be digitized, right? We do need to send containers. 75% of our sales are exported to North America, Europe, and so that part. We have to reach our product has to reach our customers physically. In any case, SAP systems were in place in a company of our size, and with most of our customers are MNCs like BASF, Dow Chemicals, etc. The only digitization I would say happened is more people are now comfortable working out of home, and that also just in the from the corporate office. At the factory level, people still have to be there. You have to be on the shop floor. You have to have some shift in charges, but it has resulted in a very high level of sanitization, hygiene, awareness. These kind of changes have come in and which are here to stay in a manufacturing
Are you
setup.
leveraging digital for customer acquisition in any way, although your customers are, I understand, businesses itself? Or it's just the status quo?
What customers see, anyways, we have a very sticky customer relationship. We have long-term contracts. They value the fact that a business stood out, was able to hold its ground during such a pandemic. Also, they also give importance. Sustainability has been a key buzzword over the last few years, and so they see the measures that you have taken. So it does put in a positive light for you.
Perhaps when you are in that B2B business, the one thing that really, I guess, helps you in times like this is, like Vinity mentioned, right? There is this stickiness. There are these long-term agreements and relationships that are established between the customer and, the purchaser. And I think that really works. But, Gauri and Vinita, the one commonality between the both of you is that you'll have work in the consumer-facing business. You'll do work. You'll both have that FMCG, the foods business. And I'm sure, Gauri, you may be having a couple of questions for Vinita, or Vinita to Gauri as well. So, Gauri, I'll let you take the floor on this one then.
Vinita, actually, my question is, you're on, so many boards and, part of the management of larger organizations than ours. But, how do you think that companies could have actually perhaps seen this coming or been better prepared for something like this?
It's a very interesting question, Gauri, and I would just reframe it to say that I'm not sure companies could have been prepared for this. But what is absolutely clear is that despite so much of conversation around risk assessment, risk management, we've all read management literature talk about the VUCA world, which is, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I think COVID-19 is the poster child of that VUCA world. And yet when it happened, it caused, it caught most businesses, and I'm talking about most businesses globally, unawares. I think what all managements must do is, what is the agility? How quickly can we cope with a discontinuity like this? And do we have mechanisms to put into place? I think the world has demonstrated this whole work from home. Most businesses have been very quick and very agile to get into a work from home mode. I think it surprised everybody, whether it was buying thousands of laptops to make sure that your people had the capacity to work from home. So I do think it's a wake up call for business in many ways. Actually, I have a curiosity question, Mubina, if I may, for all three of our panelists. This is also a time that in many ways has focused attention of businesses on people, on the well-being and welfare of employees and so on. We've also been faced with a very unprecedented movement of people. They may not have been your employees, but the general economic environment within which business operates. And a lot of companies talk about ESG, which is our responsibility to social causes, environment, and governance. So in your experience, have conversations around people changed in your business, and if so, how?
Yes, absolutely. I'll just take it very quickly because, now the first question we speak to anyone, whether in the factory, how are you doing? How is your family doing? How is so-and-so doing? So that general well-being awareness has definitely improved personalization. Everyone, we recognize that people are working, value for employees has just gone up. So, and this has been a positive learning, and it's here to stay. This personalization of with each other.
I think in our case, I would just say that, we realized the value of constant communication. I think, we didn't have the answers to give our team. We didn't know what was necessarily going to happen with our business, but just staying in touch and having a regular dialogue with our team, from down to sort of from housekeeping right up to like our senior chefs to, literally everyone together was, I think, what people needed at that time. And that's something that's going to stay throughout. It's not something that was temporary.
Yeah. Shivaarti, any thoughts from you?
For us, it was a two-leg process. The first is the empathetic part of the whole scenario wherein everyone needed the support, and we have a very close-knit team for that matter to support each other. But in terms of working from home, except for the system being in place, but the empathy needed to be intact and the understanding in terms of deliverables, etc. And the other leg, of course, which a lot of businesses faced was the cash flow management, which was an equal part of managing the team, because empathy doesn't really pay your bills, So for that, we came up with the FTI, which is the Frontier Tech Impact Venture Builder Fund, which is India's first venture builder fund, housing early stage companies from scratch, which is from where we got our support for the cash flow. And I had the opportunity to co-found it with my other partners. Varun.
Very nice.
And so, these were the two imperative legs to support your team in such times, in whichever way one can.
Viniti, I just actually had a follow-up, and I was very interested in knowing this, that we say that for a consumption-facing business, it's obvious that things have really been, bad. I mean, it's obvious, right? And even after we come out of this crisis, we know that, consumers may not have so much cash in their pockets to spend it on discretionaries. But do you think that perhaps for a B2B like yours is, it would be easier to sort of sail through a crisis like this? Or would we be mistaken in thinking like this?
See, again, now B2B just simply depends what sector you are servicing, right? Now, if it's the agrochemical sector, that's doing fine because people are going to need, it's agrochemicals. And similarly, if it's pharmaceutical, was doing really well in Q1, in fact, because most corporates around the world were stacking up. They were carrying high levels of inventory for most drugs and pharmaceuticals. So that did extremely well in Q1. In our oil and gas sector, That's been down starting April, and that's going to stay down for the next 6 months because people are just not going to travel as much. There's a consumption of oil is not going to be there, so there's going to be very less requirement. Our product is used in oil recovery in building oil wells, so that portion of the business is going to stay down. So again, it just depends on what sector you are catering to.
Actually, I would completely agree with that. If you're in the automotive sector.
Okay, well, this has been such an interesting.
Sorry, Mubina.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Make your point.
No, I was just saying. I was just saying that what Vinati said is so true. Think of the automotive sector. If I am a supplier to the automotive sector, it is a B2B business, but it's going nowhere in a hurry.
That's a very valid point, actually. Because within businesses as well, we've seen some businesses really go down in the dumps. Again, hit because of COVID. But ladies, it's been such a pleasure having all of you with us, and I'm sure a lot of the entrepreneurs watching as well may have gotten away with some very important takeaways, made notes as well, I hope. And I know in general, it's just sometimes words of encouragement as well, right? That you're not alone in this crisis. If you are facing problems in your business because of the lockdown, so have we. And I think, having company in this misery sometimes is the best boost that you need. And again, like we said, necessity sometimes is the mother of all invention. So Vinita, Vinati, Shivaarti and Gauri, many thanks for joining us today on this very special episode of The Money Show.